It started with a silence so unusual that even veteran palace aides noticed it immediately. No press briefing. No smiling departure photos. No carefully timed leaks to soften the headlines. And when Catherine, Princess of Wales, emerged from that late-night Privy Council gathering beside William, Prince of Wales, her expression carried the weight of something far larger than routine royal business. Within hours, whispers spread through Kensington Palace corridors that the balance of power inside the monarchy had quietly shifted, and Queen Camilla had not been warned in advance. Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. Reports suggest the meeting inside Buckingham Palace was never meant to attract public attention. Official schedules remained deliberately vague. Senior aides allegedly received direct instructions to avoid discussing who attended, what was said, or why security arrangements around the gathering suddenly intensified late into the evening. But inside royal circles, secrecy on that level almost always signals one thing: a decision capable of reshaping the institution itself. According to palace administrative whispers, the discussion centered around what insiders privately described as future continuity planning, a phrase that immediately ignited speculation because of its timing. For months, royal correspondents had quietly hinted that tensions were building beneath the surface of the monarchy as questions surrounding King Charles's long-term health continued to grow more serious behind closed doors. And while the palace worked relentlessly to project calm, insiders claim senior royals were already preparing for scenarios far beyond the public's understanding. What made this moment explosive was the growing belief that Catherine had been elevated into a newly strengthened advisory role tied directly to the future of the crown. Sources close to royal operations whisper that the Princess of Wales was no longer being viewed merely as a future queen consort waiting patiently beside the heir. Instead, she was allegedly becoming a central stabilizing force within the monarchy itself, a figure senior courtiers believed the public instinctively trusted during a time of uncertainty. Different interpretations of the meeting describe Prince William as unusually firm, even resolute, as discussions reportedly shifted toward long-term institutional strategy. And when Catherine and William finally departed the palace that evening beneath unusually heavy security presence, witnesses noticed something impossible to ignore. William appeared focused, controlled, determined, but Catherine looked emotionally burdened, as though the full gravity of what had just been placed upon her shoulders had only begun settling in. Meanwhile, reports suggest Camilla's inner circle was left blindsided by how quickly the atmosphere inside royal operations began changing afterward. Several royal correspondents claimed tensions had already been escalating privately for months, particularly surrounding influence, ceremonial positioning, and internal access to sensitive planning conversations. Palace insiders whisper that certain longtime advisors connected to Camilla suddenly found themselves excluded from discussions they once moved through freely. Others allegedly noticed that conversations increasingly revolved around William and Catherine's future responsibilities rather than preserving existing dynamics around the king and queen. And while no official statement confirmed any restructuring, the silence itself became deafening. Because inside the sacred machinery of the monarchy, power rarely moves through dramatic public announcements. It moves quietly, strategically, behind locked doors and guarded conversations. But what truly stunned royal insiders was not Catherine's rise, it was the quiet dismantling of the influence Camilla had spent years building behind palace walls. For years, Queen Camilla appeared untouchable inside the royal machine. From the sun-drenched coronation of 2023 to private state dinners at Clarence House, her influence seemed deeply woven into the daily mechanics of the monarchy. But according to multiple palace whispers, senior figures inside the institution had begun asking a dangerous question. What happens when the future of the crown no longer aligns with the ambitions of the present queen? That question, once spoken only in guarded corners, reportedly began moving through the highest levels of royal planning with a quiet force. It was not framed as rebellion. It was not dressed as personal rivalry. It was presented as something colder, more institutional, and far harder to dismiss: public continuity. Reports suggest that courtiers had grown increasingly concerned that the monarchy could not afford confusion at a time when King Charles's illness had already placed the crown under emotional strain. Every appearance mattered. Every gesture carried meaning. Every royal placed near the center of national attention became part of a much larger calculation. And in that calculation, Catherine was no longer simply admired. She was becoming essential. Inside palace circles, insiders claim Catherine's calm discipline had begun to stand in sharp contrast to the unease surrounding Camilla's expanding internal influence. Camilla had spent years building relationships, shaping domestic rhythms, and quietly strengthening her place beside the king. But the monarchy does not only measure loyalty by proximity, it measures trust by survival. And as the public continued looking toward William and Catherine as symbols of stability, senior traditionalists allegedly began questioning whether the future could remain safely tied to old arrangements. The concern was not only about image, it was about the sacred continuity of the crown. The careful passing of authority from one generation to the next, without rupture, scandal, or visible weakness. According to Palace Whispers, the Privy Council had been reviewing long-term succession optics since early 2025, quietly studying how the institution might protect itself if Charles's public duties became more limited. Within those discussions, Catherine's name reportedly surfaced again and again, not as an ornament, not as a background figure, but as the emotional anchor of the next reign. Royal historians were said to have drawn comparisons to Queen Elizabeth II's early preparation years, when discipline, silence, and duty slowly shaped a young princess into the living symbol of national endurance. Catherine, insiders suggested, was being positioned with the same deliberate patience. Prince William, meanwhile, was reportedly moving with careful restraint, strengthening Catherine's institutional role without creating the appearance of open confrontation. That restraint made the shift even more powerful. There were no loud declarations, no public challenge to Camilla, no dramatic palace rupture. Instead, influence began moving through briefing rooms, ceremonial planning, advisory access, and private strategy sessions. Certain responsibilities, once assumed to remain near the King and Queen's office, were allegedly being reviewed for gradual transition toward Catherine. The message was subtle, but unmistakable. The monarchy was beginning to prepare around the Wales household, and as those private discussions intensified, one confidential memorandum reportedly changed everything overnight. Some documents alter policy, others alter history. But according to whispers circulating through the highest echelons of Buckingham Palace, one classified memorandum delivered to senior royals carried consequences so explosive that aides immediately moved to contain knowledge of its contents. By dawn, the monarchy's internal hierarchy had quietly begun to change. Reports suggest the confidential document was introduced during a restricted Privy Council review tied to long-term crown continuity planning, a process that insiders claim had accelerated dramatically behind palace walls in recent months. Officially, nothing appeared unusual. Public schedules remained intact. Royal engagements continued. Carefully rehearsed smiles still dominated headlines. Yet beneath that controlled surface, something far more significant was unfolding. Palace administrative streams reportedly described the memorandum as less of a recommendation and more of a strategic blueprint for the monarchy's survival during a period of growing uncertainty surrounding King Charles's health and the institution's future stability. What allegedly stunned several senior figures was the document's repeated emphasis on Catherine's long-term public trust value. According to sources familiar with the discussions, the Princess of Wales was presented not merely as a future ceremonial figure, but as an essential pillar of continuity, capable of preserving public confidence during transition. That language carried enormous weight inside royal operations because trust, more than tradition itself, is the true currency of monarchy. Courtiers reportedly argued that Catherine had become uniquely positioned in the public imagination, disciplined, measured, emotionally composed, and untouched by the internal turbulence that had increasingly surrounded other factions of the royal household. Different interpretations of the memorandum described her not as an accessory to the future king, but as part of the institution's protective framework itself. Prince William, insiders whisper, allegedly reinforced that argument with unusual determination. Sources claim he pushed for Catherine to assume a more visible constitutional presence long before any formal transition of reign occurs. Not through dramatic announcements or sudden titles, but through carefully calibrated exposure to diplomatic strategy, ceremonial authority, and institutional planning. The reasoning, according to palace whispers, was brutally simple. The monarchy could not afford instability at a moment when public faith remained fragile. William reportedly believed Catherine represented the safest emotional bridge between the crown's present and its uncertain future. Even more explosive were claims that King Charles personally approved portions of the recommendation. While aides allegedly worked to prevent details from spreading beyond a tightly controlled circle, insiders insist the king understood the urgency behind the proposal. Charles, according to several interpretations, had become increasingly aware that the monarchy now depended upon preparing the public psychologically for the next era, before crisis forced that transition prematurely. But not everyone inside palace walls accepted the shift quietly. Reports suggest Camilla's allies attempted to slow implementation discussions almost immediately, fearing the recommendations would gradually weaken the Queen's influence within ceremonial and strategic operations. Palace administrative tensions reportedly intensified as disagreements emerged over positioning, visibility, and access surrounding future state functions. Royal commentators soon began describing the entire situation as preparation for the next era, though few understood how deep the realignment may already have become. And through all of it, Catherine reportedly maintained complete public silence despite enormous internal pressure swirling around her name. No response, no denial, no visible reaction. Only discipline, only restraint. Yet inside the monarchy, silence can become its own form of power. But the deeper the council moved into succession planning, the clearer it became that this was no ordinary restructuring, it was a quiet realignment of royal power itself. Inside royal households, influence rarely disappears all at once. It fades in stages, an invitation quietly withdrawn, a meeting suddenly cancelled, a trusted advisor no longer copied into confidential briefings. And according to insiders familiar with recent palace dynamics, Queen Camilla's circle may have begun experiencing precisely that slow and devastating isolation. Reports suggest the first signs appeared almost immediately after the council meeting, though nothing was dramatic enough to trigger an official explanation. Long-standing Camilla-aligned aides who once moved easily through internal planning channels allegedly began noticing closed doors where there had once been access. Briefing lists shifted. Certain calls were rerouted. Meetings that once included familiar names suddenly became smaller, tighter, and far more controlled. To the outside world, the royal household still looked composed. But inside the machinery of the crown, those tiny exclusions carried the weight of a verdict. What made the change so chilling, insiders whisper, was the precision of it. This was not a loud purge. It was not open humiliation. It was the kind of institutional narrowing that happens when trust quietly evaporates. Certain ceremonial planning discussions, especially those tied to future state appearances and constitutional symbolism, were allegedly redirected toward William and Catherine's office. Palace aides reportedly described Catherine's advisory presence as expanding with remarkable speed after the memorandum gained traction. Not because she demanded authority, but because senior figures began treating her as the safest bridge into the monarchy's next chapter. Camilla, meanwhile, continued with public composure. She attended engagements, smiled through speculation, and carried the dignity expected of a queen. Yet according to royal whispers, the deeper authority behind those appearances was beginning to thin. The contrast was brutal. Publicly, she remained beside the king. Privately, influence was said to be moving elsewhere. Royal correspondents increasingly emphasized Catherine as the future of the monarchy, a phrase that may have sounded flattering on television, but inside palace walls landed like a warning. Every headline that centered Catherine's steadiness made Camilla's position feel less permanent, less central, less commanding. Prince William, according to several interpretations, allegedly intensified coordination with Princess Anne and Prince Edward during this period. That detail mattered, because Anne and Edward represented something older than popularity, duty, procedure, and the hard discipline of royal survival. Together, insiders claimed, they formed a quiet wall around the Wales household, strengthening the sense that the institution was consolidating around the next reign before the present one had fully ended. Observers compared the shift to an institutional consolidation, not a personal attack, but the result still carried emotional force. For Camilla's supporters, it may have felt like watching years of carefully built access dissolve without a single public accusation. The palace, as expected, denied any internal conflict. Official lines remained calm, polished, and deliberately unshaken. But denial could not erase the mounting speculation, nor could it fully conceal the strange new rhythm inside royal operations. Catherine's presence grew. William's coordination deepened. Camilla's circle narrowed. And the silence around it all became more dangerous than any statement could have been. Yet behind the carefully managed smiles and coordinated appearances, another confrontation was quietly taking shape, one that threatened to expose just how divided the royal household had truly become. Royal power is rarely exercised through dramatic public declarations. More often, it moves silently through alliances, memorandums, private audiences, and invisible agreements forged behind ancient palace doors. And according to multiple interpretations from royal insiders, Prince William had already begun assembling exactly such an alliance long before the Privy Council meeting ever occurred. Reports suggest the effort began as quiet coordination, almost invisible from the outside, but deeply significant within the palace machine. William was said to understand that the monarchy could not wait for a crisis before deciding who would steady the crown. If the institution was entering a fragile new chapter, then every future-facing voice around him had to be disciplined, trusted, and impossible to dismiss. That was where Princess Anne and Prince Edward reportedly became essential. Anne carried the authority of duty without drama. Edward carried the patience of service without spectacle. Together, insiders whispered. They represented the old guard's sternest answer to uncertainty. Catherine allegedly became the emotional center of what some palace sources began calling the heirs' accord. The phrase was never public, never confirmed, and never meant for newspaper headlines, but inside royal circles it reportedly captured the purpose of the alliance, to protect long-term institutional trust before instability could damage it. This was not simply about preparing William for kingship. It was about ensuring that Catherine stood beside him not as a decorative presence, but as a stabilizing force already trusted by the nation. Her role, according to several interpretations, had to be strengthened quietly, carefully, and early enough that the public would accept her increased presence as natural rather than sudden. Royal staff were allegedly instructed to prioritize continuity messaging around Catherine in subtle but deliberate ways. Not through obvious campaigns, but through emphasis, placement, access, and tone. The Princess of Wales was increasingly framed as calm, resilient, and deeply connected to the future emotional identity of the monarchy. Sources close to palace operations claim her public approval played a powerful role in those decisions. The crown, after all, survives not only through law and ceremony, but through belief. And Catherine, insiders argued, had become one of the monarchy's strongest reserves of public belief. For Camilla's supporters, however, the restructuring reportedly felt like a direct weakening of their influence. Every expanded briefing for Catherine meant another center of gravity forming away from the Queen's circle. Every ceremonial discussion routed through the Wales office suggested that the future was no longer waiting politely in the background. It was already organizing itself. That realization allegedly created deep unease among those who had expected Camilla's presence beside Charles to remain the dominant internal force for as long as his reign continued. King Charles, according to palace whispers, was emotionally torn. Loyalty pulled him one way. Institutional stability pulled him another. Those close to the situation suggest he understood why William, Anne, and Edward were moving cautiously around the future, yet he also knew what such movement implied for Camilla. It was a painful balance, love against legacy, personal loyalty against the cold demands of the crown. And as insiders whispered that future Commonwealth representation plans might increasingly involve Catherine, the direction of travel became harder to deny. But while the palace fought to keep the transition controlled and invisible, the outside world was already beginning to notice the unmistakable signs of a new royal order. At first, the changes seemed almost too subtle to matter. Catherine standing slightly closer to the king during major events, her arrival receiving longer applause. Senior diplomats reportedly requesting private audiences with the Princess of Wales before formal receptions. But in the monarchy, symbolism is never accidental, and soon, even the public began sensing that something profound was unfolding behind the palace fade. Media outlets began describing Catherine with language once reserved only for sovereigns-in-waiting. She was no longer framed simply as elegant, composed, or popular. She was increasingly presented as the monarchy's emotional center, the steady figure around whom future confidence was beginning to gather. Reports suggested that her responsibilities were expanding in careful layers, more diplomatic presence, deeper ceremonial involvement, greater proximity to conversations that shaped how the crown would face the years ahead. Nothing was announced loudly. Nothing was stamped with official drama. But the pattern was impossible to ignore. Public fascination grew because Catherine's rise carried both strength and sorrow. She appeared calm, yet the weight around her role seemed heavier than before. Every gesture was studied. Every absence became a question. Every appearance beside William seemed to suggest that the future reign was no longer distant theory, but a living preparation already moving through the institution. Royal commentators began calling it a transition of confidence, not a formal transfer of power, but something almost more powerful: the gradual emotional acceptance of Catherine and William as the stabilizing future of the crown. Camilla, meanwhile, reportedly maintained her composure despite the storm building around her. That composure mattered. She did not publicly resist. She did not allow visible frustration to break through the polished surface of royal duty. Yet insiders whispered that the contrast between her outward dignity and Catherine's rising prominence created a tension that no official denial could fully erase. Palace officials continued insisting there was no coordinated restructuring. no internal divide, no quiet effort to reduce one royal figure while strengthening another. But the public had begun reading the signs for itself. William and Catherine were increasingly portrayed as the answer to uncertainty. They represented continuity without chaos, tradition without exhaustion, and a future that felt emotionally familiar before it had even arrived. Observers claimed the monarchy was preparing the nation psychologically for the next era, allowing the public to grow comfortable with Catherine's enhanced role before any formal constitutional shift forced the matter into the open. That was the genius of the strategy, if the whispers were true. The palace was not asking the public to accept sudden change. It was allowing change to feel inevitable. And as those signs multiplied, the old royal rhythm began to sound different. Catherine's presence carried more gravity. William's authority felt more defined. Camilla's position remained visible, but the emotional spotlight had begun moving beyond her. The crown was not breaking. It was rearranging itself in silence, guided by fear, duty, and the unforgiving demands of survival. And as the whispers grew louder across Britain, one final decision inside palace walls would quietly confirm what many had already begun to suspect. There was no dramatic announcement, no televised declaration, no royal decree read aloud beneath palace chandeliers. Instead, according to those familiar with the inner workings of the institution, the most important decision of all was delivered in near silence, a quiet acknowledgement that the monarchy's future would now revolve around Princess Catherine in ways few could have imagined even a year earlier. Reports suggest Catherine was granted expanded briefing access traditionally reserved for senior constitutional figures, a move that immediately sent shockwaves through the quieter corners of royal administration. Nothing about it appeared explosive from the outside, but inside palace walls, access is power. The person included in the briefing is the person being prepared. The person copied into the strategy is the person being trusted. And according to insiders, Catherine's name began appearing in circles where symbolism, diplomacy, and succession planning were no longer treated as distant matters, but as urgent questions of survival. Palace whispers claim foreign diplomatic preparations increasingly included Catherine directly. Her role was allegedly no longer limited to polished appearances beside William or carefully managed ceremonial duties. Instead, she was being folded into deeper conversations about how the monarchy would present itself to the world if Charles's health struggles continued to reshape the rhythm of his reign. This was not merely about protocol. It was about confidence. It was about making sure that when the crown faced foreign leaders, Commonwealth partners, and a watchful public, the future already looked steady before it formally arrived. William, according to several interpretations, allegedly pushed for accelerated transition planning with a firmness that revealed just how seriously he viewed the moment. He knew delay could become dangerous. He knew uncertainty could feed speculation. And he knew the monarchy could not afford to appear unprepared if circumstances shifted suddenly. For William, Catherine's expanded role was not a personal victory. It was a defensive wall around the institution he would one day inherit. Every new briefing, every additional responsibility, every quiet step forward became part of a larger effort to prevent instability from reaching the surface. Camilla's role, meanwhile, reportedly remained intact in public but diminished strategically. That distinction carried a chilling meaning. She was still seen, still honored, still positioned beside the king. But insiders suggested that the deeper planning currents were beginning to run toward the Wales household instead. Royal historians compared the shift to earlier transitional eras, when the palace carefully prepared the next generation long before the public was ready to admit change was coming. The Privy Council, according to whispers, was focused above all else on preserving institutional confidence, even if that meant quietly reducing the influence of figures tied more closely to the present than the future. Through it all, Catherine reportedly remained disciplined. No visible triumph. No public reaction. No sign that she understood how dramatically her position had changed. That restraint may have been the very reason senior figures trusted her. She did not appear to chase power. Power appeared to move toward her because the crown needed calm, and Catherine had become the symbol of it. Sources whisper the palace hoped gradual changes would prevent public instability, allowing the nation to adjust before history demanded a sharper turn. But the true meaning of Catherine's elevation was never just about titles, influence, or ceremonial precedence. It was about who the monarchy now trusted to carry the crown into an uncertain future. In the end, the transformation did not arrive through revolution. It arrived through silence, discipline, and the slow recalibration of power inside one of the oldest institutions on earth. And while Queen Camilla still stood beside the king beneath the bright lights of royal ceremony, insiders now whispered that the emotional gravity of the monarchy had already shifted elsewhere to the woman many believe has quietly become the crown's most trusted future guardian. Catherine's rise, according to palace whispers, was never about spectacle. It was about endurance. She had become the figure around whom the monarchy could build its next promise to the nation. Continuity without chaos, dignity without desperation, and duty without visible hunger for power. Reports suggest palace planning now centers heavily around the Wales household, not as an act of rejection, but as an act of survival. The crown, after all, does not move according to sentiment alone. It moves toward whoever can protect its future when uncertainty begins pressing against the gates. William and Catherine were increasingly portrayed as the monarchy's next stabilizing era, a partnership shaped by restraint, discipline, and the heavy knowledge that every private decision may one day become public history. Their strength was not loud. It was controlled. And that control became the contrast that made the entire shift so powerful. Camilla's public role remained respected, her place beside Charles still honored. But strategically, insiders suggested her influence had been reduced to make room for a future that could no longer wait quietly in the background. It was not humiliation by announcement. It was history moving past her in silence. Royal commentators described the transition as duty over personal ambition, a phrase that struck at the heart of the entire drama. Because this was not merely about one woman rising while another faded. It was about an institution choosing the face it believed could carry trust through the next storm. Charles, according to reports, remained determined to preserve unity despite the strain behind palace walls. He understood the emotional cost. He knew that shifting influence toward Catherine would be read by some as betrayal, by others as necessity. But the crown has always demanded painful choices from those closest to it. The Privy Council's actions were framed, in the end, as protection. Protection of public confidence, protection of constitutional dignity, protection of the fragile bridge between the present reign and the future one waiting just beyond it. And as the monarchy entered this new chapter, shaped by caution, legacy, and controlled transition, Catherine stood not as a conqueror, but as a guardian, silent, prepared, burdened by expectation, and trusted in ways that even her critics could no longer ignore. Because within the sacred machinery of the crown, influence is never surrendered publicly, it simply moves quietly toward the figures history believes can protect the monarchy when the storm finally arrives. Thanks for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in next one.